Flight 93, crashed at 10:03, but the seismic data says 10:06. And then he'd have a link so you could see the seismic data.
The whole mystique of intelligence is that you acquire this very valuable information covertly. If the truth be told, about 80%, 80, of any of what the information that one needs is available in open source materials.
Thompson's work soon gained mainstream media exposure.
Paul Thompson's timeline is based on public documentation of what we know, what the world knows about 9/11.
James Ridgway was among the first to bring attention to Paul Thompson's timeline.
You know, it has to be almost taken more seriously than the 9/11 Commission, because, I mean, it's open. There's nothing secret here.
As I began researching, I noticed this curious phenomenon, which is that there's a lot of explosive information that has come out in the mainstream press, but it comes out buried. As a casual observer of the news, I'd never noticed any of this stuff. You might find one important bit of information in, say, a newspaper story, and another bit of information on a news show. And if you start to put all those rather obscure stories together, you end up with an almost completely different narrative. For just about any area relating to 9/11, the story is quite different if you dig deeper into the news.
And clearly, something yesterday took place in New York that was not foreseen, that we had no specific information about.
Like most Americans, Thompson initially didn't question the Bush administration's first statements about the attacks. The administration consistently maintained that there were no warnings or specific threats.
No specific threat involving really domestic operation or involving what happened, obviously, the city's airliner and so forth.
There were no warning signs that I'm aware of that would indicate this type of operation in the country.
I first became interested in 9/11 around mid-2002, right around the time that President Bush's now famous August 6th PDB became leaked to the press.
President Bush was told in August that Osama bin Laden might be planning an attack involving the hijacking of U.S. aircraft.
Dan, it was a revelation that the White House had no intention of making public, and officials spent the entire day in full damage control.
I don't think anybody could have predicted that they would try to use an airplane as a missile, a hijacked airplane as a missile.
Nobody in our government, at least, and I don't think the prior government that could envision flying airplanes into buildings on such a massive scale.
His interest peaked. Thompson began to search for news stories that might help him determine exactly how aware the White House had been of al-Qaeda's desire to use planes as weapons. He was quickly able to compile a wealth of examples that any journalist should have been able to find. One of the earliest dates back to 1995. It was codenamed Operation Bojinka, a terrorist plot to use commercial planes to attack U.S. targets.
Ramzi Youssef, the bomb maker responsible for the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, had fled to the Philippines, where police discovered his bomb factory. Youssef again escaped, but his accomplice was arrested and spilled the chilling plot.
Operation Bojinka, a plan to blow up multiple airliners over the Pacific, was heavily reported, but Thompson noted most journalists failed to mention the second aspect of the plot. Only CNN International dug deeper into this story.
In confidential documents from the Philippines obtained by CNN, the plan was clear. He will board any American commercial aircraft, control its cockpit, and dive it at the CIA headquarters. Other buildings targeted the Pentagon and the World Trade Center. And the FBI, using the Philippine documents, did check the 4 flight schools named there, but found no evidence of any other planned terror attacks.
Only NBC reported a stunning confession by a man allegedly trained by bin Laden.
It was over a year before 9/11, a Pakistani-British man told the FBI an incredible tale, that he'd been trained by followers of Osama bin Laden to hijack airplanes, and he confessed he was now in America to carry out an attack.
Khan was recruited into Al-Qaeda at a British mosque, then flown to Lahore, Pakistan for hijack training in a Mach 767 cockpit before being sent to America, where he was told he would hijack a plane from JFK and fly it into a building.
I told him before the 9/11, about more than a year, we hijacking in America Airline.
Khan claims he got cold feet. Instead of meeting his contact, he slipped away, gambled away all his money, and in fear turned himself in and confessed.
I've been to Pakistan. I know about this hijacking, something going on.
NBC News has learned Khan passed not one, but 2 polygraphs. A former FBI official says Newark agents believed him, but word came from headquarters, quote, return him to London and forget about it.
Access to this exclusive footage from NBC is now restricted. July 2001, according to 60 Minutes, Egyptian intelligence received a report that 20 Al-Qaeda had slipped into the U.S. and 4 of them had trained on Cessnas.
Now, to the Egyptians, pilots of small planes didn't sound terribly alarming, but they passed on the message to the CIA anyway, fully expecting Washington to request more information. The request never came.
In fact, Thompson compiled stories about 14 different nations that had warned the U.S. prior to 9/11.
You could have one story that comes out on the front page and another story that comes out on page B12. And what I found is that many times the story that comes out on B12 is more important than the story that comes out on the front page.
March. Italian intelligence gave information to the U.S. based on their wiretap of an Al-Qaeda cell in Milan. The LA Times and the Washington Post said the wiretaps warned of brothers going to the United States and a massive strike involving aircraft. August. According to Moroccan and French newspapers, an intelligence agent reported that bin Laden's men were preparing large-scale operations in New York in the summer or fall of 2001. The agent was then called to the U.S. to report this information directly. August. Britain warned 3 times of an Al-Qaeda attack in the U.S., the final warning specifying multiple airplane hijackings. According to Britain's Sunday Herald, the warning was passed on to President Bush a short time later. It's unknown how many of these warnings, reported but buried in back pages, reached the White House through official channels. But one threat assessment is well known to have reached President Bush directly. It was known as the Presidential Daily Briefing, or PDB, of August 6th. The Bush administration kept it from the public for months until it was revealed in part by the CBS News in May 2002, putting the White House on the defensive.
All of this reporting about hijacking was about traditional hijacking. You take a plane, people were worried they might blow one up.
I'd like to ask you about the August 6th PDB.
Sure.
You mentioned it.
2 years later, President Bush responded to questions about what led him to request the August 6th briefing.
Yeah. Ed, I asked for the briefing. And the reason I did is because there had been a lot of threat intelligence from overseas. And so part of it had to do with the Genoa G8 conference that I was going to attend.
8 of the world's most powerful leaders gathered here to discuss global problems. And yet, the threat of violence means they're having to keep the world at bay.
Just prior to the G8 summit, CNN.com reported the head of Russia's Federal Bodyguard Service has warned of a plot by terrorist Osama bin Laden to assassinate George W. Bush. The LA Times reported U.S. officials were warned of a threat posed from the air by commercial airliners.
It's terrorists as well as protesters the Italian government fears, so anti-aircraft batteries were on standby at the airport.
Condoleezza Rice was present there, President Bush, Ari Fleischer, Karl Rove, President Bush's own family.
They were going to sleep on a boat so that a plane couldn't go into a building.
This floating resort will be home for 3 days for the G8 leaders, necessary for their safety.
If the August 6 PDB was prompted by a threat